How does a president accused of authoritarianism, blamed for one of the worst economic collapses in modern history, sanctioned, isolated, and written off by the West, still sit at the center of global geopolitical calculations today? If Nicolás Maduro is so weak, why hasn't he fallen? If Venezuela is a failed state, why do powerful nations keep returning to its door? Pause. Music dips. This is not just the story of a man. This is the story of oil, power, sanctions, survival, and a world that is no longer controlled by one superpower. We are talking about Nicolás Maduro, the sanctioned president the world can't ignore, Venezuela in the new geopolitical order. Why did sanctions fail? Why is Maduro still in power? What changed globally? Why does Venezuela suddenly matter again? Is this about ideology or raw geopolitics? To answer these questions, we must go back, not to today, but to where the world thought Nicolás Maduro would fall. Chapter 1: The President Who Was Not Meant to Survive. Nicolás Maduro was never supposed to last. When Hugo Chavez died in 2013, many believed the Bolivarian Revolution would die with him. Chavez was charismatic. Maduro was not. Chavez was a symbol. Maduro was a former bus driver. Maduro inherited a collapsing economy, an oil-dependent state, rising inflation, deep political polarization. Western media described him as temporary, weak, replaceable. And then came the collapse. Hyperinflation erased savings overnight. Supermarket shelves emptied. Millions fled Venezuela, one of the largest migrations in modern history. The world asked, how long can this government last? Sanctions followed, then more sanctions, then maximum pressure. The assumption was simple: economic pain, public anger, regime collapse. But something didn't happen. Maduro didn't fall. So the first real question emerges: why didn't Venezuela break when it was supposed to? Chapter 2: Power is not popularity. Here is the first uncomfortable truth. Power does not come from popularity. Power comes from control. Maduro understood this early. He secured loyalty where it mattered most: the military, the courts, the electoral system, state institutions. While the opposition fought among itself, Maduro consolidated authority. The military became a political pillar, not just a defense force. Economic survival for elites became tied to regime survival. To the outside world, Venezuela looked chaotic. Inside the system, power was centralized. This is why protests did not translate into regime change. This is why opposition leaders failed to unify. And this leads to the second big question: can sanctions really topple a government that controls its internal power centers? Chapter 3: Sanctions, a weapon that backfired. Sanctions were designed to isolate Venezuela. They cut access to international banking, dollar-based trade, oil markets. The goal was to starve the state of revenue. But geopolitics is never one-dimensional. Sanctions did not only hurt the government, they reshaped Venezuela's entire economic behavior. Cut off from the West, Venezuela looked elsewhere. Oil was sold quietly, trade routes shifted, barter systems emerged, cryptocurrencies were explored, middlemen appeared. More importantly, alliances changed. Russia, China, Iran, Turkey. Sanctions pushed Venezuela out of the Western system, but they pushed it into an alternative global network. This creates a new question. Did sanctions weaken Venezuela or force it to adapt to a post-Western world? Chapter 4: The Oil Truth No One Can Ignore, 1800 to 2300. Here lies the heart of the story. Venezuela holds the largest proven oil reserves on Earth. For years, this didn't matter, because oil was abundant. But then the world changed. The Russia-Ukraine war disrupted energy markets. Europe faced shortages. Oil prices surged. Energy security became national security. Suddenly, the question shifted from, should we engage Venezuela? To, can we afford not to? Quiet talks began. Sanctions were softened, licenses were granted, oil once again flowed, cautiously. Not because Maduro became democratic, not because ideology changed, but because A's geopolitics changed. This leads to the turning point question: is morality driving foreign policy or necessity? Chapter 5: Maduro in a Multipolar World. The world today is not the world of 2003. Power is fragmented, influence is contested, no single nation controls the system. In this multipolar world, isolated leaders gain leverage, sanctioned states find alternatives. Resources become bargaining chips. Maduro didn't outsmart the world. He outweighed it. He understood something critical. Regimes fall when the world agrees on their replacement, and the world no longer agrees on anything. As long as Venezuela holds oil, location, and alliances, Maduro remains relevant. Which brings us to the final realization. Nicolás Maduro did not survive because he was loved. He survived because the system meant to remove him changed faster than expected. Sanctions assumed a world with one center of power, but the world moved on. Today, Venezuela is not powerful, but it is necessary. And in geopolitics, necessity is power. So the real question is not, will Maduro fall? The real question is, does regime change still work in a world where power is no longer centralized? Venezuela's story is not finished, neither is Maduro's, and the next chapter won't be written by ideology, but by energy, alliances, and global uncertainty. Chapter 6: The Latin American Context: Why Venezuela is Not Alone. To truly understand Nicolás Maduro's survival, we must zoom out, not just globally, but regionally. Venezuela does not exist in isolation within Latin America. Across the continent, a political shift has been underway. Governments once aligned closely with Washington began asserting independence: Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, Argentina, Bolivia. This did not mean ideological unity, it meant strategic autonomy. For decades, Venezuela was portrayed as an outlier, but in reality, it became a test case for this question: how much pressure can the United States apply before influence starts slipping instead of strengthening? As new leaders took office across Latin America, the tone changed. Not support for Maduro, not endorsement of his policies, but a rejection of external regime engineering. Borders reopened, diplomatic channels resumed, isolation weakened. This raises another crucial question. If neighbors stop isolating you, can global isolation still work? Chapter 7: The Migration Crisis: A Weapon and a Warning. One of the most tragic consequences of Venezuela's collapse has been mass migration. Millions left the country, families separated, borders overwhelmed. But geopolitically, migration is never just humanitarian. It is leverage. Neighboring countries faced pressure, public services strained, political debates intensified. Suddenly, Venezuela was not just Venezuela's problem. It became Colombia's issue, Brazil's issue, the United States issue. And when migration reaches powerful countries, the calculus changes. Sanctions were meant to contain a crisis. Instead, the crisis spilled across borders. This created a silent realization. Greater than a collapsed Venezuela is more dangerous than a sanctioned one. And this realization softened positions, not publicly, not ideologically, but practically. Chapter 8: Maduro versus Media: The Battle of Narratives. Another overlooked battlefield is narrative control. Western media framed Venezuela as a dictatorship, a failed socialist experiment, a humanitarian disaster. These descriptions were not entirely false, but they were incomplete. Maduro's government responded by crafting a counter-narrative: blame sanctions, blame economic warfare, blame foreign intervention. Inside Venezuela, this narrative worked better than expected. Why? Because suffering without an enemy creates revolt. Suffering with an enemy creates nationalism. Maduro positioned himself not as a perfect leader, but as the last barrier against foreign domination. This reframes the question again. Can a government survive by controlling the story, even if reality is harsh? Chapter 9. The Opposition's Greatest Failure. Much is said about Maduro's strength. Too little is said about his opponent's weakness. The Venezuelan opposition suffered from fragmentation, personal ambition, dependence on foreign backing. At critical moments, the opposition appeared more focused on external validation than internal unity. This allowed Maduro to do something crucial: outlast legitimacy challenges. When foreign governments recognized alternative leaders, Maduro waited. When momentum faded, he remained. Power rewards patience, and this leads to a brutal geopolitical truth. Regimes often fall not because governments are strong, but because oppositions are stronger. In Venezuela, that never happened. Chapter 10. The United States' Strategic Dilemma for Washington. Venezuela represents a paradox. On one hand, human rights concerns, democratic credibility, political pressure; on the other, energy security, regional stability, migration control. Every policy choice creates a contradiction. Maximum pressure failed to produce regime change, but full normalization risks legitimizing authoritarianism. So the U.S. adopted a third path: selective engagement, not friendship, not surrender, but transactional diplomacy. This reveals something deeper. Even superpowers are constrained by reality. Chapter 11. China and Russia, not saviors, but strategists. Russia and China did not support Venezuela out of charity. They supported it out of calculation. China secured long-term energy access, reduced exposure to U.S. dominance, strengthened presence in Latin America. Russia challenged U.S. influence, gained a symbolic foothold, demonstrated sanctions resistance. Neither country needed Venezuela to succeed. They only needed it not to fall, and Maduro understood this distinction. Survival was enough. Chapter 12. The Silent Transformation Inside Venezuela. Quietly, Venezuela began changing, not politically, but economically. Dollarization spread informally, private enterprise re-emerged quietly, market controls loosened without announcements. This was not reform, it was adaptation, ideology bent under pressure, and Maduro allowed it, because survival mattered more than purity. This raises a subtle but powerful question. Is ideological flexibility the ultimate survival strategy? The real mystery is not why Maduro survived sanctions. The real mystery is why the world assumed power would behave the same forever. Venezuela exposed a flaw in modern geopolitics: that pressure does not guarantee change. Sometimes, it only guarantees endurance. Maduro is not a hero. He is not a villain. He is a case study. A case study in regime survival, sanctions fatigue, multipolar adaptation, resource geopolitics. Venezuela's story warns the world: the rules that worked in the past may no longer work today. Nicolás Maduro may not shape the future, but his survival tells us exactly what kind of future is coming. Like, share, and subscribe.